Hello, and welcome to episode 96 of Prose, the first episode of the new year. Happy 2022 all. This week, watch someone meet a ghost in the worst of places at the best of times, and meet a cursed girl that has a blessing. Episode 96 is rather special to me. Both guest authors this week are students of mine. By no means can I take any credit for their creative writing, however, as that's not what I teach. This is all them. I certainly hope you enjoy their stories as much as I do. Please go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast across platforms. And if you are enjoying the show, go over to Apple Podcasts and just click those 5 stars. It really helps out a lot. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app is your favorite. Lastly, please do go check out Prose Patreon as well at patreon.com/ProsePodcast and consider supporting the show there. Not only will I be extremely grateful, you'll get some cool swag out of the deal. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have Mina Grover's The City's Graveyard and Olivia Bezerra's Let All the Skies Cry for Her. Enjoy. The City's Graveyard by Mina Grover. A November day. The air seemed stale and indifferent until every time the sharp wind blew. The inevitable coming of winter creeped ever nearer, like an icy hand slowly closing around your neck. It is called the city's graveyard, a rotting townhouse collapsing at the end of an alleyway. The 2 broken windowsills in front now held plastic trash bags that dangled and hung loosely in the breeze. Any trace of paint was long wiped away to a layer of dirt, dust, and mold. The place received its name from its well-known reputation. Everyone knows it's where you go to die. Inside, I sat cross-legged on a ratty maroon carpet that displayed many mysterious stains. The air was stiff and carried the potent smell of burning plastic. My eyes burned, and I felt like my head was going to explode. I need air. I'm going outside, I mumbled to no one in particular, while rubbing my face. The people around me gave no sign of recognition. No one is able to function when they've surrendered to the beast. I, of all people, understood this. I stepped out, leaving the door open behind me, and sat down on the front stoop. I squinted for a while, just trying to will my eyes back into focus. Slowly, the familiar picture started to reform again through the blur. The brick wall lining the edge of the alleyway and abandoned buildings colored by graffiti mirrored on the other side. The graveyard was planted at the end of this narrow passage and stood alone, a threatening dead end to the unlucky ones who stumbled upon it. I fished through my pocket and brought out a pack of Newports and a red lighter. Sighing, I brought the cigarette to my lips. It was my last one. I threw the empty carton to a pile of litter settled at the edge of the street. What a fucking dump. The wind picked up, seeping right through my hoodie and into my bones. I shivered. Many people came to the graveyard. but only the toughest ones could survive the winters. The cold infected everything. I remember last winter. At times I woke up and couldn't move for hours. In the midst of the hell of a graveyard winter, sometimes I considered those who didn't make it the lucky ones. There's a point you reach here when you are no longer living. You merely exist for the beast. But those lucky ones, whom death chose as his captives, escaped, defying this fate. An angry bitterness started to spread through my body. They are free and I remain here, waking up every day, slowly losing who I am. I felt the tips of my fingers and lips start to go numb. Quickly, I raised the lighter to the end of the cigarette and cut my hand around, creating a small cave. I couldn't keep my hands from shaking. Every time the lighter flicked, small orange sparks jumped out eagerly, but no flame. Come on! I gritted my teeth and shook the lighter. Finally a flame caught and I gratefully inhaled the familiar feeling of silk entering my lungs and the taste of tart earth. The smoke trailed away from the cigarette, curling and dancing into the air, climbing higher and higher until it eventually dissolved into nothing. I stared entranced. If only it was that easy to disappear. The sound of movement snapped me back into reality. I squinted. There was someone coming. A moment of panic flashed through my mind and I felt myself tense up. The approaching figure was small. At this thought I relaxed slightly, but remained apprehensive. It was not unusual for the graveyard to get visitors. For most, it was considered the last stop, a final resort. Those were typically the usual junkies, strung out and turned away by their families with nowhere left to go. As they came closer out of the darkness of the alleyway, they started to come into focus. To my shock, it was a little girl. She was wearing a puffy blue winter coat and baggy jeans and laced-up white sneakers. Her brown hair was held back in a thick braid down her back. As she walked down the alley, her hand trailed behind her, skimming along the brick wall. She came closer, now only a couple feet away, and I couldn't stop staring. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. Finally, she came to stop in front of me and looked up. I cleared my throat noisily. Are you lost? She frowned slightly. No, she said faintly. No, I'm looking for someone. There was something familiar about her, something odd that I could not quite place. Well, whoever you're looking for, I'm sure you won't find them here. Look, this isn't a place you should be wandering alone in. It's not safe. I felt surprised at the strong feeling of protectiveness that suddenly arose within me. Oh. Her face fell. Well, can I wait here with you then? I paused for a second, taken aback. Sure? I said gruffly. She climbed the steps gracefully and sat down right next to me. I stared blankly at her fragile body, her small, soft hands that still held the innocence of youth. Her face was contorted into an expression of worry, small lines indented in her face. It had been so long since I had seen a child. She felt alien to me. Someone who was too pure to be next to. The silence settled for a few minutes. I took a long drag and then exhaled the smoke. So, I cleared my voice again. Why are you alone? Where are your parents? They're at home, she said simply. And where's that? Upstate New York, in a little town called Cold Spring. You don't say. I paused for a minute. I actually grew up there. Haven't thought about that place in ages. Oh, really? Her face lit up. Isn't it wonderful? I think it's my favorite place in the whole world. Yeah, I think I remember being very fond of it as well. What's your home like? She asked eagerly. Something about seeing her get excited made me feel good. I wanted her to stay that way. Well, let's see. Thinking about my childhood was odd. Over time, it had kind of just disappeared. Like it never existed in the first place. Like I was born in the graveyard and had remained here my whole life. I vaguely remember some parts of it. We lived in an old farmhouse next to the railroad. Every night the train would pass through town and rattle the walls and windows of the house. When I was younger, I was afraid our home would collapse. But eventually, it became sort of reassuring, something that I grew to appreciate. Every night at midnight, the world would shake me to sleep. Wow! She grinned from ear to ear. It was like that single memory unlocked a whole web of images that had been locked away. Memories started coming back in flashes, one after the other, things I had long forgotten. I felt excited and overwhelmed, and suddenly I didn't want to stop talking anymore. Every Sunday after service, if I made it through listening to the priest without collapsing with boredom, my parents allowed me to pick a single piece of candy from the general store in town. The best day of the week. Eventually, as I got older, I started asking for money instead. I remember what I spent it all on that summer. A new pair of white Nike sneakers. They were my pride and joy. I practically polished them every night like an idiot. I stopped and took a moment to breathe. I felt confused at how easy I found it to spill my guts to this little girl I had just met. It was like she was an old friend and I had known her my whole life. She giggled. I stopped. I had almost forgotten what laughter sounded like. Who are they? She was pointing behind me to the open door. I glanced up and followed her finger. You could just make out the outlines of people inside, some nodding out and muttering to themselves. A dark cloud passed over me, all the light of my old memories gone in an instant. Are they your friends? She asked again. I winced. Not exactly. She shifted her body around towards the doorway to get a better look. Don't look at them, I said. Why not? I stood up abruptly and pushed the cracked door shut. As I sat back down, I took another drag. Listen, there's no joy here. We've just become ghosts of who we used to be, empty vessels waiting for our next hit. I felt a sense of despair dawning slowly in the pit of my stomach. Again, that feeling of protectiveness was rising within me. I didn't want her to see this side of life. I wanted her to remain in the golden fields and laughter, in the only world she knew of Cold Spring. Don't they scare you? I asked as I exhaled the smoke. No, she said simply. They don't scare me. They look sad. I was taken aback by this. I had never looked at the others as actual people before. But you are different than them, she added. What do you mean? Something was beginning to click in my head. A thought, but it was just beyond my reach. You haven't lost yourself yet, no matter how hard you've tried to. Silence fell like a blanket, muffling the air. Your parents, I'm sorry. I froze. How did you? They loved you so much. You've been alone for so long. She placed her small hand on my knee. A wave of grief washed over me. A grief I had yet to experience. A grief that I had hid from in every drug, every high. An old farmhouse, laughter, a little girl. The taste of milky chocolate candy on a Sunday afternoon. A car crashed into the side of the highway, alone. A woman dressed in a gray suit. Away to Harlem, grandma, a body on the floor. More people dressed in gray suits, smiling, trying to hold my hand. I don't fucking know you. Foster care, alone. Run away, get high, alone. Take a hit, shooting up, alone. Escape everything. I gasped for air. Tears burned my eyes. I jerked my knee away from her hand. What the fuck? Who are you? I was looking for someone. She ignored my question. I was looking for someone who needed my help, someone who was floating away, almost gone. You see, I needed to help them remember their joy and youth, but also their pain and hurting. I needed them to remember who they were, to remember what it feels like to live. She paused. Don't you remember me? The thought that I couldn't reach before finally dawned on me. It was the oddest sensation. I felt dizzy, like the world was shrinking around me. Her big brown eyes swimming with tears, her hair carefully braided with love down her back, her shoes, those white Nike sneakers, worn but still shining, kept well care of. Cold spring. She smiled. I felt something burning my left hand and shouted in surprise. I looked down to see that the flame had traveled all the way down past the filter and burned my hand. I dropped it quickly and looked back up. Everything was the same. The dark brick alleyway, the graveyard looming behind me. The sky was a bright, piercing white. It hurt my eyes. I was alone again. There was no other. There was no childhood self sitting next to me with innocent youth and giggles. I sat for a while. I felt paralyzed. I didn't want to move, let alone think. Nothing felt real anymore. I don't know how long I sat there staring into nothing. Eventually the air started to change and the sky turned darker. I supposed it was getting colder, but I couldn't feel anything. Slowly I stood up, turned around, opened the creaking door, and stepped back into the graveyard. I walked right past the strewn skeletons scattered on the ground, groaning and mumbling, and straight into the bathroom, closing the door shut behind me. The bathroom was small, about the size of a closet. There was a single light bulb with a string hanging from the ceiling. I moved to the sink and looked into my reflection in the cracked mirror. A stranger stared back. Her face was sunken in, bones jutting out like mountains in all the wrong places. Dark blue and purple bags hung underneath what once were youthful brown eyes. Her gray-stained hoodie hung loosely on her frail body. I felt sick, like I wanted to throw up. It was like I was seeing myself for the first time. I was trapped and slowly drowning. Come on, come on! I hit my fist against my temple. I could feel sweat starting to slide down my neck, cold and sticky. I knew what was coming with dread. I groaned. A sudden piercing pain grabbed my stomach. The room started to spin. I felt like I was being torn apart. There were hands all over my body grabbing at me. They were whispering in my ear. I screamed. I fell to my knees, sobbing. Time stopped. And then just like that, it ended. I opened my eyes again. I was breathing heavily. Slowly, I started to get up again, my bones aching and protesting with every move. I staggered to the sink and gripped the side with both of my hands. I turned the faucet on. Brown, rusty water flowed out. I cupped it into my hand and washed the tears, drool, and snot from my face. The water felt cool and relaxing. I still felt lightheaded. I knew that it would come back. I took a breath, in and out. Okay. In a few minutes, I was slamming the front door of the graveyard shut behind me. I stepped down each of the steps. When I reached the second to last step, I paused, and then jumped down as high as I could. For a second, I was flying. Then, I landed with a grunt, toppling slightly to my knees. I opened my mouth and let out the biggest laugh I could muster. It filled the still air and shook the whole world. When it ended, another followed, and then another after that. Thank you for listening to The City's Graveyard by Mina Grover. Mina Grover was born and raised in New York City. She has struggled with addiction throughout her high school experience, falling in and out of different rehab programs. However, creativity has always remained a way of expression and an escape from hardship for her. While she enjoys writing, especially realistic fiction, her heart lies with music and playing guitar. On a personal note, you should all keep an eye out for Miss Grover. She is bound for some great things in the very near future. Next up this week, we have another one of my phenomenal students. We're going to join Miss Olivia Becerra in her short story, Let All the Skies Cry for Her. Let All the Skies Cry for Her by Olivia Becerra. Elena was born with brown hair and brown eyes and bad luck. Her sister would tell the story of Elena's birth with barely concealed sorrow, not willing to meet the little girl's brown eyes. When she was born, she didn't cry, but it rained as if the sky cried for her. Their mother died in childbirth, and Elena thought, to herself, that it must have been the beginning of it all. Perhaps in her dying breath, her mother had placed upon her a curse of bad luck. Or maybe her death was part of Elena's inherent misfortune, and she could be blamed for it like everything else that went wrong on the farm. When she worked on the fields, every seed Elena had sown shriveled and died. Every crop she planted would be devoured by locusts or burst into flames during the dry season. The orchards she tended to would bear only rotten fruit, and the herbs she grew turned poisonous. Her father hit her, once for every crop lost. After the age of 9, Elena was not allowed to work on the fields. All animals seemed scared of her. The livestock she took care of often became sick or ran away in the middle of the night. Birds fled when she fed them, ignoring her seeds. Things were no different inside the house. When she set the table, the plates would break, and the milk would spoil, and the food would go cold too soon. Eventually, her sister banned her from the kitchen. Soon the only chores she was allowed to do were errands. Fetch the water from the well, Elena. Buy the groceries from the market, Elena. The well was quite a ways away, on the withered mountain, and Elena pushed the cart filled with jugs of water until sweat soaked her back, binding her skin to her shirt. It was on a day like this, a day like any other, except it wasn't, where Elena rose with the sun and set out to draw water from the well. She knew this day was special, but dared not to mention it. It was noon before she got back and unloaded the jugs from the cart. She saw her brothers working out in the field, but did not wave in fear of cosmic retaliation. She went inside, passing her sister, who avoided eye contact. Elena made her way to her father's room and opened the third drawer on the left of his cabinet. She briskly sorted through the change and collected enough for the evening groceries. She turned around to see her father standing in the door, barely upright, expression murderous.
I told you no more tending to the orchard. How many times do I have to say it to get it through your head, you stupid girl?
Elena didn't bother to mention she hadn't been tending to the orchard. Everything wrong that happened on the farm was her fault. He advanced on her, whiskey heavy on his breath. 12 lashes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Elena took it silently, her sister watching from the door with tears in her eyes. Elena left the room, her father still heaving like a bull. Her sister would probably be next. No one escaped her father's wrath. Elena used some of the precious water she'd helped bring down from the withered mountain to wash off her hands, bloody as they were. She had pocketed the money already and set out on the long road to town. It was market day after all, and a lashing was no excuse for negligence. She took the long way, avoiding the ladders and cats and stepping carefully over each crack in the sidewalk. Elena didn't need any more bad luck. At the market, she bought the usual food, supplies for the farm, and eggs, since their chickens weren't laying. She saw a pair of yellow ties for sale and stared at them for several minutes. The shopkeeper looked up at the dirty, sweaty girl with the long brown hair and the big brown eyes and winked, giving them to her for free. She smiled for the first time in a while and resolved to wear them in her braids from now on. But for now, she snuck them into her shopping bag with the rest of the stuff so she wouldn't draw attention from her father. Groceries in hand, she set back out to the farm. The bags scraped on her bloodied palms, digging into her hands like termites. Yet Elena continued down the dusty road, goods in hand, firm expression in her eyes. It was almost sunset when she was approached by a band of men. They wore gray and black, along with the bandana of the wolf, Los Lobos. Elena knew of them. She nearly dropped the bags in fear. The largest one separated from the pack and approached her. He spoke in a rough voice. "Money." Elena dug the change out of her pocket and held it out with shaking hands. He grabbed it remorselessly. "Bags." Elena clutched the bags with hesitation. He narrowed his eyes and held out his hand. His expression seemed to imply that he wouldn't ask twice. And Elena cried. She cried for the first time in years, for the first time not in physical pain. She cried for her yellow hair ties, and the sky opened up and answered. Thunder roared and rain poured down. Lightning struck the road right in front of her and hit the man in front. Bad luck. The other men scattered, cries of "Bruja!" echoing amongst them. Many of them tripped and fell as they ran. Lightning stretched its brittle fingers across the sky. Elena smiled. Bad luck. She celebrated her 12th birthday by tying her hair back with the yellow ribbons and making the rain stop. She picked up the bags from the now muddy ground, leaving the scattered coins in her wake. She saw it as a peace offering for the man who now lay on the ground. Elena was nothing if not forgiving. Then she continued home to confront her father, thunder following in her wake. Thank you for listening to Let All the Skies Cry for Her by Olivia Becerra. Olivia Becerra is a senior attending school in Brooklyn, New York. She likes magical realism, short fiction, and fantasy. Her favorite Latin American authors are Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jamaica Kincaid, and Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist being a particular favorite of hers. She also enjoys drawing and painting alongside her writing, and is hoping to get into art school. She wishes she were in Mr. McGee's advisory family, so she could hang out with him and with Miss Kang, as they're a pretty cool group. There you go, listeners. A student said I wasn't all that bad. All music and sound effects you have heard throughout episode 96 come from YouTube's royalty-free audio library and the always amazing freesound.org. Some are also my own creations. Everything being used is being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication Licenses. That does it this week for Prose. Our next full episode will come in 2 weeks' time. Please do consider sharing the podcast with someone you think might enjoy these bi-weekly journeys together. And of course, as you continue about your day, I hope you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always. Stranger than fiction.